Hello, and welcome to History Chats. So, here's a fun bit of trivia for you. In 1928, the head of the commander in chief, the president of these United States, Calvin Coolidge, visits Wausau, Wisconsin. This is an interesting moment in our history, and it's also one that might not be a complete surprise to you. It certainly is something that we knew about, for a while, and we've actually had it in exhibits and programs. So, for example, if you happen to have come into our new exhibit that we opened last year, the 1920s Rebellion, Prosperity, and Loss, up on the second floor of the History Center here, you might have seen this wall. And on this wall is, well, here, a picture of Calvin Coolidge being driven by local auto dealer L.H. Hall as part of his visit here. So it's made appearances before, and that's kind of interesting. Actually, as a bit of a transition here, let me show you this. It's not the only part of that exhibit that is of note. In fact, let's see here. So you might have seen, if you came to see this exhibit, and if you haven't, it's okay. And maybe you didn't even notice there's a lot of stuff here, but there is a film projector in one of the corners of the exhibit here. This was owned by Dr. Joseph Smith, who was a local physician here. That's the name doctor here. And super important to the establishing of the modern medical world here in a lot of ways, but also happened to be a amateur photographer and took a lot of pictures and apparently film too. This is a portable projector that he would have used to take across out and about in the community. So if, maybe the local PTA meeting, they need some, entertainment or somebody to come talk for the Rotary Club. As we understand it, Dr. Smith would have taken this camera out and showed some 16 millimeter film, such as this. All right. So we didn't put it in the exhibit, but this came with the camera projector. This is a box that he would have taken out as part of those programs, and it has a bunch of film, cans of 16 millimeter film. Now, these range from different topics. There's some that have to do with a trip to Yellowstone. There's some newsreel footage. There's, I think, one can is dedicated to the U.S. Army Signal Corps film that they took, little program they put together during World War I of some of the battles. So he would take these out and do some of these things, which is kind of cool. But for our purposes, one of the really cool things that we recently digitized is this one right here. I know it doesn't, well, it says President Coolidge Parade in Wausau, 1928. So we actually had film, and we've recently started to digitize some stuff, and so I can show you this. This is footage of the day in which Calvin Coolidge came to visit. Again, 1928. This is in August. It's in Wausau. This is just over the bridge on the west side at what was in the corner of Clinton and First Avenue, as far as we're aware. Yeah, there they are in the new Chrysler, I want to say. And the guy who just put his hat back on, that's Calvin Coolidge. Pretty cool. It adds an extra dimension here. And I'll show some more footage from that can of film as we go. But first, I think maybe a notable question, because it's cool to know that, like, hey, Calvin Coolidge was here in 1928. But it does bring up some other questions, like, why? What was he doing here? Like, just threw a parade for him, right? You might even be asking the question, who? Because let's be honest, Calvin Coolidge is not the most well-known president in the history, even in the 20th century, right? He, and that's part of his personality. Like, he was kind of known for being this quiet, reserved, even stuck up. He didn't seem to have a sense of humor. Partially, this is who he was. It was also sort of a character that he expected, like, this is what the public wants. But yeah, his nickname is Silent Cal because he was a very, very quiet and, witty person, very intelligent, very good at what he did, but, maybe not the most flamboyant president. Certainly doesn't fit the criteria of, maybe the modern era in which, many people might say, somebody you'd want to have a beer with, right? Is that still what people say these days? I don't know. Let's talk about his career a little bit in brief. He came to national prominence earlier, but for our purposes, when he is chosen after the Republican National Convention in 1920 to be the vice presidential candidate under Warren G. Harding. Harding will ultimately win. They'll end up winning the presidency, and so he will become vice president. Now, in these days, the vice presidency is not a stepping stone to the presidency in most cases, right? Often it was another part of the secretary. Like if the party wins, like the Republicans win again after Warren G. Harding is done, usually it's not the vice president that is going to be running. It's, the Secretary of Interior or something. But in this case, he does become president. And it's unfortunate, the reasoning here, which is Warren G. Harding dies about into his third year in August of 1923. He is doing some touring and some speaking out in California, and he has a heart attack and passes away. And this makes Calvin Coolidge the president of the United States. And he inherits an interesting moment in history because breaking around this time is the Teapot Dome scandal, which is a fun name, doesn't really get the gravitas of the situation. Essentially, one of the members of Warren G. Harding's government turns out to secretly have owned stock in a oil company that he did not disclose and maybe had some ability to influence. And, saying this in the 2020s, it feels kind of quaint, but this was like the biggest scandal in the political history of the United States up to this point. It really shocked people. And so, Calvin Coolidge stepping into this, people don't really know who he is, and he has to instill trust in the presidency, in the office, and so his handling of the scandal really endeared himself to a lot of people. And he fills out the rest of what was Harding's term, and in 1924 he's elected to his own term, running as under his own ballot. Now this shows the county by county breakdown, but in general, everybody except the Deep South goes for Coolidge. It's overwhelming. He wins the popular vote, the electoral vote, all of it. Davis wins the South, the Democratic candidate, which, is of the time. And obviously there's some green in here, including Wisconsin. Wisconsin is the only state that doesn't vote for the Democrats or the Republicans, and that is down to the fact that Bob La Follette, our own Bob La Follette, just unhappy with Coolidge as the nominee, splits from the Republican Party to run as a progressive under a third party. And he ends up getting 16% of the vote, which is pretty dang impressive. However, Coolidge obviously wins overall, and so he has another 4 years as president. Now, it's not really worth going into the nitty-gritty of all of the things that happened during this period, but just to understand who Coolidge was, he was somebody who was like a business-friendly, small government conservative guy. Business-friendly is maybe not the right word. His philosophy was the federal government should not take on the burden of a lot of things, even things that he would, when he was the governor of Massachusetts, which he was when he was put up as vice president candidate. There are things that he supported that he does not support as a federal expense. It's not really the government job, the federal level, national level, to do some of these things. And so he has this philosophy and he sticks to it, even to the point of vetoing the very popular soldiers' bonus bill. The bonus bill was like this big thing, like, service groups and the military, folks were like, this is something that would be really, really good. All of these veterans from the Great War, the World War I, really need help. And so we should help them out. But unfortunately, Coolidge says from the beginning, yeah, that's not a responsibility. I'm going to veto that if you pass it. And sure enough, he does. And his justification is the expense is too great for the taxpayers. And also, able-bodied soldiers should not expect a bonus for doing their duty. You shouldn't have been serving if you wanted the money. That's, you got what you deserve. Maybe that's taking it too far. But it's just not our responsibility as the federal government to do this. But to his credit, they overrode the veto. It passed, and his administration then, continued on and did it, because if that's what Congress wants to do, that's what we do. Other things, kind of similarly, the farmers of this country are not doing well. The Roaring Twenties does not extend as very strongly to the agricultural parts of the country. And with this, there's discussion about maybe the government should step in. And Coolidge is, again, unsurprisingly, adamant that that's a bad idea. No government aid. He strongly opposes the idea of government going into the business of financing agriculture. So there's no farm bill under Calvin Coolidge. And again, it's not to say that he wasn't doing some things. He also signs in new tax laws to do tax cuts with the idea that this would then grow the government, the overall GDP and all of that, and it kind of does. I think we can say with some certainty, looking back, that some of the policies of deregulation and things did not help the pushing the government that happens under Coolidge's time period, or I should say the country, not the government specifically. But some of this stuff is going to lead to a stock market crash that's going to bring us into the greatest depression that the country has ever seen. It's easy to sit back and go, hey, why'd you let that happen? But that's another part of the legacy, for better or worse, of Coolidge. But all of that aside, that's how his policy was. He also just happened to be, just as an interesting point, in 1928, decides to move the White House to the summer up in northern Wisconsin. So I'll point out here, Senator Len Root was instrumental in this. I should step back and say there's a long history of the president of the United States deciding to leave the White House in Washington, D.C., during the hottest part of the summer, to go somewhere else. Congress is usually out of session at this point, and so it kind of makes sense to, this is a good time to leave. Frequently, they will go back to their, home, and in fact, in 1924, his first term, year as summer as president, Coolidge goes to the Coolidge estate in Vermont, follows that up with, Massachusetts, where he's from. The following year, in 1926, he goes to upstate New York, and there apparently he gets a taste of outdoor recreation thanks to his the head of the Secret Service. And from there, he says, you know what, I want to just travel. And so in 1927, he goes out west to the Black Hills, I think, South Dakota. You can check that, I guess. I should have checked it. Anyway, but here, more importantly, in 1928, he wants to go somewhere, and Senator Len Root from Wisconsin, he's from northern Wisconsin, he says, hey, you should come up here. He said, yeah, absolutely. So he establishes a summer White House, the operations out of the high school of Brule, Wisconsin, on the Brule River. And so that's pretty exciting. We're excited that he came to Wisconsin and not to, say, Michigan or Minnesota, which he could have went, but nope, Wisconsin. Oh, also, before I get away from this, let me just point out, Len Root is an interesting person to have a friendship that does this. Back in 1920, he was the leading candidate for vice president, and the party leaders thought he would be the better fit for Harding. But when the vote came, the rank and file decided they wanted Coolidge, and so, one of the inherent legacies of Len Root's life is he gets the moniker the man who would have been president, right? So very close to have then been the vice president and taken over and had Coolidge's position. But apparently they were on good terms despite that, rivalry, I guess. Maybe it wasn't a rivalry. And so, yeah, hey, Wisconsin, that's pretty cool. And what's more interesting, he decides to come to Wausau. Nice. So how does that happen? Well, he takes the trip. It's a day trip. He comes down by train. He arrives at the Chicago Northwestern Railroad Depot here in downtown Wausau, kind of on the island there. Gets into it's a brief ceremony. And he gets into an automobile driven by Mr. L.H. Hall. You can see them there. Says Coolidge's top hat back there. Their son, John Coolidge, is sitting in the middle, and then Mrs. Coolidge, Grace Coolidge, is on the left here. And then there's some Secret Service who are down, of course, as well. So in this automobile, then they head west across the bridge, and there's a bit of a parade. Now, at the time, Um, they expected, they weren't really sure, right? They thought anywhere between 25 and 30,000 people were here, lining the streets to see him pass at this part of this parade. And then, of course, at Marathon Park, which was the destination, big crowd here. So once he arrives, gets out of the car, and then gets up onto a stage that had been built over the racetrack there. The newspapers said of this that it was supposed to accommodate 150 people and that it was carpeted, which is an interesting thing to include. I don't know if there's 150 people, maybe more or less. I'll note also that it is amplified, sort of. So there's a brief introduction, and then he stands up, gives a speech. He is, after all, Silent Cal, so I can't imagine that all those people in the grandstand heard a word he said. They did have a microphone, and you can see these speakers, bullhorns, whatever, that amplified the voice out. So again, maybe they heard a bit of it. Thankfully, the newspaper transcribed it and published it the following day so people could read it. But hey, the president's here, right? That's the exciting thing. Yeah, gives a speech. The speech is, it's fine. Calvin Coolidge is not the most well known as a public speaker. He's not a charismatic guy, and he lives up to that. Even the Wausau Daily Herald, which is the very enthusiastically in favor of the Republicans. They cover, like, I've shown a lot of the activities, the headlines from the Daily Herald. They were excited to follow his career, right? The best that they could say is that the speech made some common sense to their interpretation, but they had to admit that Calvin Coolidge had clearly had, quote, no desire to attain a reputation as an orator. So, yeah, don't get hung up on that. It's fine. He gives a short speech. That's the exciting part. He's here. Then he gets back in the car, goes back to the depot, and leaves. He's here for all of 2 hours. Still pretty cool, right? How often is there a sitting president in Marathon County? Well, not that often. It's going to be over 50 years before another one does, as far as I can find. Technically, Taft showed up at a bit here, maybe, but not as like an official, and he certainly was not president. The next sitting president to come here, as far as I can tell, is Jimmy Carter in 1979 for an event with Dave Obey, Congressman Obey, was celebrating, I think, 10 years in office, some anniversary of being in public service, and it was a bit of a fundraiser for him. And then others, of course, have come too. So, like, for example, George W. Bush is here as part of his re-election campaign in 2004, has a rally right at Marathon Park, right at the, not quite the same spot where Coolidge spoke, but in the same vicinity, at the track there. The grandstands, obviously, is changed at that point. But, yeah. So, this is all interesting, but I think it's not just a matter of, like, nobody else was doing it when Coolidge came. Coolidge's visit is also unique in a different way. Like, his visit here was not, like, that rally, all of those people, that's not for him. It's not because he's running for office, right? It's not because he's trying to raise money. Like, famously, he says, I'm not going to run in 1928. There is a presidential election in a few months. He is not here to campaign for it. In fact, so the previous year had decided to not to run, and he writes a note that he then gives to the press and as part of a press conference. So it's a very Calvin Coolidge way to do this. He basically writes this out. I do not choose to run for president in 1928. Calls the press conference, gives them the sheet of paper, and then he's like, great, thanks for coming, and he leaves. At least that's the story. But yeah, true to his word, he does not want to run again. He says, I don't think it's like, that'll be 10 years in office. No one should be president for 10 years. He could have run, of course, even after the 24th Amendment was passed, he hadn't been elected to president only once, just the once. He had, don't need to get into that. The 24th Amendment hadn't been passed, so he could have been elected, 6 times if he wanted to. It's not until Roosevelt in the 40s that they changed that. But, he doesn't want that. So And in fact, he kind of chooses Wisconsin to come up here and, you know, go fishing and boating up on the Brule River, because he wants to get as far away from the Republican National Conference convention as possible as they choose his successor. And they'll ultimately go for Hoover while he's up in Wisconsin. Despite attempts to try and, you know, nominate him, he was like, no, I won't accept it. So Hoover it is. And actually, Hoover makes a trip up to do some fly fishing with him. And apparently they just kind of didn't interact much. But anyway. The reason that he's here is not for any of those things. It's because the Legion asks him to come. Let's talk about why he's here. The American Legion, the Wisconsin Posts and Administration, the Department of Wisconsin of the American Legion, chooses a city every year to have a convention. And in 1928, for the 10th annual one, they choose Wausau. When they find out that, hey, Calvin Coolidge is going to be in the area, yeah, invitation. But there's also other stuff that's already going on. He actually waits until like 2 weeks before the event to confirm that he's going to show up. So as a result, you know, they're planning for him not to be there, and it's a lovely scramble to accommodate him when he does. But it's a thing that's taken a long time, and a lot of people have put a lot of effort into putting a good conference on. So yeah, on Monday, August 13th, 1928, everything kicks off, and the Legion captures the city, as they say here. They had some events, or not events, but like some stuff happening in the weekend before. But then, you know, Monday is the day that everything gets started. People show up, register, and a lot of people show up. As this says here, there are 3,000 members of the Legion that are in town for the conference convention, and in particular, record number of women from the auxiliary, which have also been formed. So these are the women who are working as part of the American Legion Auxiliary. They are turning out in numbers. They knew that there was going to be a record-breaking number. They expected about 500 women. Something closer to 800 show up. So that's pretty cool too. But okay, if the American Legion are having a convention here, and that's why Calvin Coolidge came here, why is the American Legion a thing? Where does that come from? And why do they have the conference in Wausau? Well, the American Legion is formed in 1919. It's a service organization patterned off of the previous examples, like probably most notably the Grand Army of the Republic, which was the Union soldiers after the Civil War created this organization. And there was others like the Southern Sons of the Confederacy in the South. There was the Veterans of Foreign Wars, which gets formed after the Spanish-American War. So there are other examples of this, but the American Legion is formed in Paris by servicemen who are abroad, or at least they get the ball rolling to be theirs for World War I. Like I said, Paris is the first one. And then they have a convention, or sorry, it's not a convention. It's a caucus in St. Louis, stateside, a couple weeks later. And that kind of gets the ball rolling. Over the summer, they organize state departments and local posts. And, you know, by the end of the year, they have their first national convention in Minneapolis. Now, what exactly the American Legion is formed to do? I mean, this is from the Wausau pilot, kind of explaining it. There's a lot of like big ideas here, right? And I'm not going to get too bogged down into the philosophical ideas behind this. It's basically a service organization for members of the American Legion who had served in France or in any capacity, actually, stateside. They didn't have to be, you know, actually seeing fighting in Europe. Anybody who served in World War I could be part. And their larger goals is to create, to continue to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States and foster and perpetuate 100% Americanism. And these are like interesting ideas that we could break apart. Even at the time, like what is Americanism? What is 100% Americanism is maybe interpreted differently in different places. But I just want to point out that, like, at the top there, this is an organization that, following the other examples of these other groups, is not a continuation of the military. They had all served in the military, but the ranks and the distinctions that were earned in the war do not carry over. We're not just going to be led by the generals and the admirals. It's going to be a new organization that is based in the civilian side of things. And unlike some of the earlier groups like the Grand Army of the Republic, which was very much affiliated with the Republican Party, and the Confederates, Sons of the Confederacy, very much for the Democratic Party as we turn into the new century. The American Legion is not going to be affiliated with anybody. This is a deeply nonpartisan organization. They will work with the Democrats, they'll work with the Republicans, they'll work with the progressives. As long as you're in power and you can help do the things we want to do, we're going to work with you. I mean, unless you're communist or the members of the Ku Klux Klan, or like, obviously there are extremities here, but we won't get into those for now. Generally speaking, I would say that the American Legion can be summed up with this. To help veterans return from the war and integrate them back into civilian life. And that can mean everything from, providing a friendly face as sort of a local person to, the friendship of having gone through this, maybe a bowling league or something like that, all the way up to advocating for federal legislation like the bonus bill, right? All of that. To remember and memorialize those who did not make it back and their sacrifice, right? That's important too. This is an organization based off of a single conflict, and that conflict was a hell of a conflict, right? Those people who came back from the trenches and they saw some stuff, and they wanted to keep why they did it, and those that didn't come back alive, and that's a big part of this too. Remember the sacrifice. Remember what happened. And then also to kind of, and this is less of a thing that they're trying to do, but more of a thing that will happen, which is to provide community going forward, a vehicle for involvement in local life, and for doing things like that. So mention, just to get to the Wausau example of the people who are hosting the convention. In 1919, this is the St. Louis caucus. That I mentioned. This is kind of what starts everything motion in the stateside. One of the people that's in this room, maybe not pictured, I'm not sure, I can't really see him for sure, but in this room probably is one of 27 men from Wisconsin representing us, the state, named Newman Bellis. Now Bellis is from Wausau. His family built the Bellis Hotel, a big hotel in town. Later in the 20s, he and his brother will sell the hotel, and it will be torn down after the building of the Hotel Wausau, which is the landmark building. So it's kind of in that vicinity. He'll move to California and continue doing hotels over there. But for the moment, he's in the States, right? The war happens. He answers the call. He enlists, becomes an officer in the army, and sees deployment to Verdun. And it's there that he is grievously injured in combat, and he survives. He is sent back home to recover, and he does. And while he's here, he's not the only one. There are a number of other sailors and soldiers who are still here, and they have this association, this little club that gets going. And from that, they then send Newman Bellis down to St. Louis to be part of that convention. When he comes back, hey, there's this American Legion, and they then create a local post, which gets organized after the State Department gets established in Wisconsin in June of 1919. Now, I'll note here that he goes down representing the county and the region, not specifically Wausau, and the organization isn't just a Wausau thing. I mean, the post becomes Wausau, but they work with, as you can see here, they go down to Athens tomorrow to prepare, or to help get their group going. So Athens gets established. They also, in this early period, try to get Marathon City to get a group. They have some prospects there, but I don't think that pans out for whatever reason. There will be a Marathon City post, but that will be started in 1947. So that's after World War II. But it isn't just Wausau, right? These are the Marathon County posts as of 1928 at the time of the convention. Athens is there at the beginning. Mosinee not that far behind. And then the western part of the county follows suit. Smaller numbers out there, 20 to 30 of them, but still active and still important to those communities. And, in Colby, Spencer, Stratford, and Unity as well. And then in addition, you could expand it out to just over the county line to, Marshfield, Abbotsford, Burnham Wood. They all have posts as well. So the people of Marathon County there's a lot of people who serve in the conflict, right? It's a huge mobilization of men and resources, and a lot of those men continue to now return and take active roles in their communities. And so it's part of this. Now in Wausau, they follow the tradition. I mean, all of them do. They're not just post number 10. It's the Talbot Montgomery Post, and this is named after one of their own who does not make it back. Frank Talbot Montgomery was entered the service alongside Newman Bellis and some of these other guys. Goes to become an officer as well in the army, and he serves as part of a machine gun company in Argonne, in the Argonne Forest, right up to the end of the war. In like the closing months of the war, he is even cited for gallantry. Like there's an attack and the commanding officer is killed, and he steps up and takes leadership and salvages the situation. And he's the plan, people are told, is he's going to be taken off the line and sent back to the States to train new machine gunners to go fight. But the war is wrapping up, and they change their mind. They say, just stay there, don't worry about it. War's coming to an end. And unfortunately, the fighting doesn't stop, even though they know that's going to happen. And he is killed 3 days before the armistice is put into effect, which is a tragedy, right? It really is. It's a that it happened to him and to a lot of people, unfortunately, is a tragedy. But certainly remembered for the man that he was, and the friend, and the soldier that he became, and so they decided to name it after him. Now, I will note that the American Legion is not currently named the Talbot Montgomery Post. Today, it is the Montgomery Plant Dudley Post in Wausau. It still exists; they're still active. But what happens is in 1942, the American Legion decides, hey, we've patterned ourselves off of like the Grand Army of the Republic, these Civil War soldiers. They are all dying off. And as a consequence, the organization is going to disappear in a few years. We don't want that to happen. And so they follow the example of the VFW in establishing a perpetual organization, which means that you don't have to have served in World War I in order to be a member. If you served in World War II or future conflicts, you could be as well. So this allows it to continue. And as a result, we've continued to adapt the naming of the organization to reflect the conflicts and the people who sacrificed during this. So, the Dudleys, of course, a name that is very prominent in Wausau in our history, and Donald Plant, I think it's Donald Plant. He's the first Marathon County serviceman to be killed in line of duty in World War II. He died at Pearl Harbor. So that's how that works too. And that's how, for example, Marathon City, they don't necessarily create a post in the 1920s in the aftermath of World War I, but there's this sort of second wave that happens as they open it up. And so there are others that take part. And so that's why there's an American Legion in Marathon Cities to this day. Okay, so what are they actually doing, though? I'm gathering around. Just as a couple examples here. In Wausau, the Talbot Montgomery Post, before they adopt that name, they're taking charge and leadership in patriotic functions, organizing Memorial Day parades, for example, right? Patriotic celebrations. They're also, again, they're not partisan, but they are political. It might not be Republicans or Democrats, but they are going to try to advocate for what's best for their members. And so they come out and are strongly favor the endorse the bonus bill. They also do stuff like build a boxing ring, right? Sometimes the activities of the American Legion are less about the philosophical underpinnings of what the goal of the Legion is, and just a way to create community. And so sometimes that means things that are, popular among the members. So not every, post creates a boxing ring, but here in Wausau, there's enough interest that they do that. And for a while, they host some bouts. But then again, they also do stuff that is very much tied, right? Like, and I show this because while I was putting this together, I realized that one of the other films that's, in this box here, well, you get the idea. You know what I'm talking about. That one that had just, footage from the U.S. Signal Corps, that was this. So the U.S. Army puts together a little film called Powder River, and they make it available for groups like the American Legion to show as a fundraiser and to raise awareness about what happened during the war. Featuring many of our homeboys in real action, the battles of Catigny, Chateau-Thierry, Saint-Michel, and Argonne Forest, presented by the Talbot Montgomery Post American Legion. at the Grand Opera House. And then they also had a showing a little bit later in the year in the Bijou. But it's interesting that they have a children's fair here, 25 cents for children, and there's a matinee. I've not actually seen the footage on there. I can't imagine that it's too the most, you know, visually representative of what they actually went through. I think that there's probably some, maybe not as gory as it might have been. I don't know, but interesting, right? So these are all very important to the fabric of life in the 1920s, right? But also there are things that continue to be important going forward. The Legion is also very involved in things like advocating for the building of a new concrete bridge to cross the Wisconsin River, which results in Memorial Bridge here. So this happens to be dedicated. Memorial Bridge is named such as a memorial to all of the servicemen who died during the Great War for Marathon County. And it's dedicated on August 11th, 1928, which, if you're paying attention, is Saturday before the American Legion Convention in Wausau, which is as good of a transition back to this as possible. So again, from Dr. Smith's footage here, let's take a look at the parade. As I said, the first day was kind of a getting settled day. They had a banquet and some meetings and some institutional things, business and all of that sort of stuff at a meeting at the Rothschild Pavilion that evening, that Monday evening. So they had a short 3-hour meeting, apparently. Speeches and some business and voting, some stuff like that. You got to get that out of the way. Then they had a banquet, and then they had dancing. They brought in Henry Gendron's orchestra from Chicago, if I remember correctly. So some fun, modern dance music to dance the night away. Although maybe not too late, because then they had to wake up for the following day, which is what you're seeing here. This is the parade. This is the big deal. It's a huge parade. It really is. This is not when Coolidge is here. That's going to be the following day on Wednesday. There's going to be an abbreviated parade that accompanies him there. But this is the big one. This consists of members of the posts from across Wisconsin. I'm not sure how many of the 400 and some were represented here, but a lot of them did come out in force. And they brought themselves and floats. There's a lot of floats. Automobiles and trucks turned into floats and things like that. Let's see them there. The auxiliary comes out in numbers too. The ladies, again, 800 of them, so a fair number of them. I think in all, there's an estimate of about 5,000 people that were taking part in the parade itself. So that's pretty big. And of course, a lot of bands. They ended up bringing in 32 bands and drill teams. Many of them, 30 of them are from Wisconsin. One was from Illinois, Illinois, someplace. And then there was the railroad band, the official band of the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, which is maybe the more prestigious of the groups here. But again, many of them are Legion associated. It was a common thing for communities, legions to support a local band. In the case of Wausau, that is not the case because Wausau has the 128th Infantry Band, which is affiliated with the National Guard. And of course, they take part. But I do know that I believe Mosinee had a Legion band that took part here. So now this all wrapped up. It went down the streets of Wausau, which is where all this is. But they then also crossed the bridge to the west side, and then made their way to Marathon Park, where the parade ended. Based off of the scheduling, I'm guessing that it was probably about a 2.5-hour parade, which is, again, a massive parade. The biggest in the history of Wausau up to this point, the biggest in the history of the American Legion. Pretty cool. Now, at Marathon Park, where they would end, the day continued. All those bands that had been playing in the parade, they stick around and do a competition. So each of them would, perform a number or two, and then they would be judged, and the winner would then be given an award. And this is kind of a common way to make the most of all of these groups coming here. A lot of talented musicians and a lot of people looking for something to do. So this keeps them, let's go out and hear the bands. I believe the winners this year were given to Waukesha. Yeah. But it's not the only thing happening. Before the band competition goes at Marathon Park, people looked up to the skies and saw a demonstration of aerial daring and formation flying by the 1st Pursuit Squadron, which had come over for the day. They'd been stationed in Detroit, or near Detroit, but they came over. They did some demonstrations earlier in the day, and then they did a big flyover. you know, there's 6 planes piloted by some of the best pilots. Some of them aces during the war, right? And I think they did like a mock formation, kind of a skirmish, like dogfight type thing, which would have been really cool to see, obviously, especially for an audience that many of them had probably never seen anything quite like this. Um, which is actually kind of par for the course in 1928. This is also the year that we build the Alexander Airport, which puts us on the map. I mean, literally, this is a picture of in June, a month before the convention. We were a stop for the Ford National Air Reliability Tour, which was like a big thing that people followed. All of these planes crossing the country. There weren't a lot of places in cities in Wisconsin, but especially even in the country that could accommodate this sort of thing. And so Wausau became a stop. And actually, it would be won ultimately by a Wausau native pioneer aviator, John Wood. That's another story, though. But anyway, the American Legion was also very important in getting this founded. In fact, the airport is named Alexander Airport because the Alexander brothers decided to just develop it when the city was taking a little too long to get moving, and so they just said, "Fine, we'll do it." And ultimately, it then later becomes a municipal airport and given to the city to run, but it is the Alexander Airport. And one of those brothers, Ben Alexander, also happens to be the main chairman for the entire conference of the American Legion and himself an active legionnaire himself. It's not just a band competition in the parade and the airplanes. There's also a tournament of golf. Like I said, there are some things that the Legionnaires get into because it's just popular among the Legion and their members, and golf is definitely one of those. I'll leave it to others to make an argument for why this fits into the larger philosophy of the American Legion and Americanism and patriotism. I'm sure it's there. Closest I'll get is to say that in the month following all of the hubbub with the convention, the Legion capitalizes on this by making arrangements and to build their own golf course. The competition had been at the country club, but following that, they decide to build a golf course on the northeast side, which becomes the American Legion golf course. And, unlike the country club where you have to be a member in good standing, in this case, yeah, show up and pay, and anybody can hit the links, shoot some golf. You shoot golf? I'm not really a golfer. We'll move on. I'll also just say that if this was a winter convention, because they often had winter groups too, kind of smaller, often bowling, they had a tournament with that too. One of the more prestigious aspects of this is, of course, these are all military men. They decide, and the conference or the convention every year has a shooting competition. Marksmanship was a skill that they had come to appreciate, and so yeah. So this is out. I'm not sure specifically, but it was a range that had been built for this purpose earlier this year on the Eau Claire River. In the vicinity of Schofield. So I'm guessing we're talking about west. And it kind of does look like, out near Yellow Banks Park, near Camp Phillips Road, somewhere, back there. But I don't know. But anyway, they had a competition. And this was an annual event. The Talbot Montgomery Post in Wausau was one of the front runners. They had been the defending champs, actually, having won the last competition the previous year in Marinette. And they actually come through again, I think. They definitely win the rifle competition. The pistol competition goes to Nina as the team that has the best there. There's some uncertainty about who gets the overall trophy because Wausau had a team that overall placed the best, but Nina had the better individual shooters, and so they contested Wausau getting it. But either way, certainly the local team did the community proud. There's a lot of stuff that they get up to, and I'm not going to just go down the list. In 1928, actually, they did something interesting in Wausau. Usually the convention would have like a pamphlet that they would have, like a program. They put out a full-on book, a yearbook. Like this, here, we'll see if I can... This is a full-on... Yeah, it's quite the book. In it, they had sections dedicated to, here's the head of the Wisconsin department and their address. Here's reports from different committees. There's a long section about the local posts, both the American Legion and the Auxiliary. There's a lot of representation of women in this, which is really cool to see too. Um, for highlights here, we can look at this. So high spots of the year 1927. So, okay, I'm not going to go through all of these, but membership, some business stuff. Road signs is interesting. They commissioned some road signs that were kind of shaped like the American Legion, and it said "Protect Wisconsin Children" or "Slow Down." Basically, automobiles were becoming a little bit of a menace as they're becoming more popular, and not the most safe, as the roads weren't particularly the best, and the cars themselves didn't stop on the dime, and people weren't used to it. And keep in mind that back in this point in 1928, it's not like speed limit signs were posted all over the place. Start and end of city limits, like knowing you're supposed to slow down, sometimes you can miss that. And so this was an attempt to try to address that by putting up these signs, and it seemed to be pretty popular. Poster contests, working with the schools, again with the highways that are being built. Let's make them look nice. Let's build trees. Let's beautify the state highways. Airplane tours, big promoters of aviation. Poppy sales, they sold 500,000 poppies. This was a big fundraiser. They put to work disabled veterans who were able to then make a living making the poppies, and then the proceeds would then go to programs. Working with the Boy Scouts, again, it's next generation sort of deal here. Americanism. How do you get people to become Americanism? Get out the vote. Let's try to push these institutions that as a citizen you should be taking part in. That's the patriotic thing to do, to be an informed member and to exercise your right to vote. And so that makes sense. And maybe a little less divisive than maybe anti-immigrant sentiment that was prevalent in some places, but maybe not as popular elsewhere. I don't know. That's its own complicated subject. But also conservation. The American Legion in Wisconsin, and I don't know how widespread this was across the rest of the country, but they really appreciated the outdoors, outdoor recreation, right? But also just like, hey, the lumber industry is really coming to an end by 1928. And it's done a number, we've forested a lot of the trees and forested forests. The rivers and the lakes, like the beautiful natural environment that was Wisconsin has largely been put to the saw. And so let's try to keep what we have. Let's try to replant. Let's try to preserve. So the American Legion actually has a 2,800 acre camp, like adjoining Lake Tomahawk, which is this bit over here. And they have a resort up there. Again, I think this is slightly the interests of the American Legion members, especially northern Wisconsin. This becomes a really important thing, as tourism is kind of one of the few things that replaces the lumber industry. So they're going to support that too. And also just generally, a lot of people in this country start to really enjoy the idea of going out and fishing and boating and communing with nature. Perhaps nobody more so than, well, here's Calvin Coolidge. So Calvin Coolidge, he comes up to Wisconsin, and this is actually a campaign that was launched by the Outdoor Club of Wisconsin, which was sort of a proto-tourism. It's its own, I keep saying this, it's its own story. Maybe we'll come back to this, but they really tried to get people to come up to Wisconsin and promote tourism by capitalizing on the idea that Coolidge was here. He had used in his 1924 election the slogan, "Keep cool with Coolidge," and so they're kind of a play on that. And certainly Coolidge enjoyed the outdoors. He had kind of appreciation for it. And still, he took some time a day to come down to Wausau to speak to the American Legion. Why, though? Because, ultimately, that's the question, right? He gives this speech. Again, I've read through it. There's some interesting stuff in here, but generally speaking, it's nothing special, right? He's not here to electrify the crowd with a speech. He's not here for a rally. When he's done, he gets right back in the car, goes back to the train station, and heads back up to the River Brule, where he enjoys the next few weeks of his time there before heading back to Washington. In the end, I think that there's a real question here, like, why did Coolidge visit Wausau? Like, on the surface, why not? He's in the area. The American Legion has a convention here, so why not come down? But again, remember, Wisconsin wasn't exactly the most friendly place for Calvin Coolidge. Marathon County barely voted Republican in the 1920 convention. We definitely went very strongly for, La Follette in 1924. This is maybe like, it's not to say that he was hated here, but I think his reception was probably not like the Democrats here probably didn't like Calvin Coolidge. The progressives didn't like Calvin Coolidge, certainly. Even the conservative Republicans, the stalwarts, they were disappointed with his trip. Like, all things said and done, they had hoped that he would be here to, say some words in favor of Coolidge, get people excited about the new candidate. And of course he didn't, because he's Calvin Coolidge. He's Silent Cal. He's not going to do that. And also, he's speaking to the American Legion, right? This nonpartisan group, they don't want him to come. Like, if he had came and led, you guys should go turn out the vote for my guy, Herbert Hoover. Like, that would not have flown. So then why does he come, though? Right? He does anyway, despite being in, I don't want to say unfriendly territory, because I think generally, he's still the president of the United States, but, politically, this isn't the strongest point for him. The American Legion, he spent much of his presidency trying to stop them from their signature thing that they tried to get pushed, the bonus bill. But still, he comes anyway because there's a professional obligation. He's the president. This is his job. He needs to make he's not here for his own ego. He would much rather be out fishing on the Brule. That was generally the consensus, and I think that's probably true. But he still came. And because he did, it leads an interesting story. I mean, again, this is footage from Dr. Smith, who for, 10, 20 years after this event, continued to hold on to that footage as a prized thing. L.H. Hall, the guy who drove Calvin Coolidge from the train station, his family donated a whole mess of photographs of this parade with Calvin Coolidge because it was this cherished event. Like 30,000 people didn't show up just to see him. And in return, like, I think you could make the same argument on the other direction. Like, people aren't coming out to see George Bush in the tens of thousands in 2004. It's a very different environment. And I don't know. I hesitate to make direct correlations to the more contemporary politics and the presidency of today. I mean, for a variety of reasons, if I'm being honest. But I think it's a pretty remarkable moment that Calvin Coolidge, at the end of his presidency, he's not looking to get reelected. He's not here for politics. He's here just to see Wausau, just to tip the hat, give a speech, make an appearance. And it's pretty cool that he did. So there you go. There's a little information about the story behind the trivia fact that Calvin Coolidge came here. Probably more information than you ever wanted to know. There's a lot of stories like this from the 1920s that, going back to the beginning there in the exhibit that we put together last year about the 1920s, there's a lot of stories that, in putting this together, we had to go, this is a really cool story, but we don't really have the space or the object or the way to tell it in this physical exhibit. But you know what? Maybe we can do it in history chats in these videos. There's a number of these that I'm going to try to put together over the course of 2025. We'll see how quickly I can pull them together. I want to do my due diligence to tell good stories. Hopefully they're not all, 55 minutes or whatever this ends up being. But I think there's some good stuff there. So that's kind of the plan going forward. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to go back to the week to week live history programs, history chats programs that we did since 2020. For a variety of reasons I won't get into here. But history chats is not dead. It's still going. It'll come up with these stories about the 1920s and other things that pop up. We have some other things in the works, so keep an eye out for that, which I guess is my way of transitioning to the conclusion here, which is that, as this is on the internet, subscribe, follow us on social media. Since we're not doing these as a weekly thing anymore, if you want to know when the next one comes out, make sure that you're subscribed and follow, sign up for a newsletter, all that fun stuff, and that'll get you the next history chat when it comes out. Yeah. Anyway, I think I'm going to call it there. Thanks for watching. Yeah, if you're still watching, hopefully you enjoyed. And we'll see you next time for some more history chats, whenever that is. Bye.